Lyra stood on the crest of a hill, her silver skin shimmering under the twin suns of Nixa Prime. The light bathed the fields below, casting a serene glow over the village of Ferox. From up here, everything seemed peaceful, as if nothing could disturb the quiet harmony of her world. Her people, the Nixons, were known for their grace and intellect, but Lyra had always felt out of place. She longed for adventure beyond her village, dreaming of exploring the stars and distant planets. But those dreams felt more like distant fantasies lately. Life had grown difficult. Her family, once respected in the community, had fallen on hard times. Crops had failed, and resources were dwindling. Her parents had grown quieter, more distant, their conversations hushed and filled with tension. Lyra sensed their worry, but whenever she asked, they reassured her with hollow smiles and gentle pats on her head. She had hoped things would get better, but tonight, her world would unravel in ways she could never have imagined. As the suns set and the twin moons rose, Lyra made her way back to the small house she shared with her parents. The house was modest, built from pale stone and wood, with intricate carvings etched into the doorframe, a symbol of their once proud lineage. When she entered, the air inside felt heavy, charged with an unseen weight. Her parents were seated at the table, their faces drawn and pale. Her father, Renar, a once strong man with silver hair now streaked with gray, avoided her gaze. Her mother, Alara, a woman known for her fierce determination, looked more fragile than Lyra had ever seen. "Lyra," her mother began, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The seriousness in her mother's tone sent a chill through her. She sat down across from them, her eyes darting between their faces, searching for answers. "Is something wrong?" she asked, though deep down she knew the answer. Her father sighed heavily, running a hand through his thinning hair. We haven't been honest with you, Lyra. Our family is in a great deal of debt, far more than you know." "Debt?" Lyra frowned. "Why didn't you tell me? We could have—" "There's nothing we could do," her mother interrupted, her voice sharper now, tinged with desperation. "We tried everything. The crops failed, the market turned against us, and no one would offer us any help. We had no choice." Lyra's stomach tightened with dread. "What do you mean, no choice?" Her parents exchanged a look that was filled with guilt, fear, and something else, something darker. Her mother's hands were shaking now, and her father's eyes were wet with unshed tears. "We had to settle our debt," Renar said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The traders, they offered to clear it, but in exchange, they demanded something valuable, something they knew we had." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The realization hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She recoiled from the table, her eyes wide with disbelief. No, you didn't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We had no choice, Lyra," her mother said, her tone pleading, as though trying to convince herself as much as her daughter. "They were going to take everything. We couldn't let that happen. We thought—" "You thought what?" Lyra screamed, standing up so fast the chair clattered to the floor. "You thought selling me would solve your problems? I'm your daughter." "We thought it would save us," her father said, his voice cracking under the weight of his guilt. "You'll be taken care of, Lyra. They promised—" Lyra's vision blurred with tears as the full horror of the betrayal sank in. The people she had trusted most, the ones who were supposed to protect her, had sold her to slavers. The realization crushed her, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. The room spun and her heart pounded in her chest. Before she could say anything more, the door behind her burst open, and a group of tall, imposing figures stepped into the house. Their skin was a dull gray, and their faces were covered in breathing masks. They were the traders, the slavers her parents had made the deal with. Their leader, a towering figure with cold, glowing eyes, stepped forward. "It's time," he said in a deep, mechanical voice, nodding toward Lyra. "No!" Lyra cried, backing away, but there was nowhere to run. One of the slavers grabbed her arm, his grip cold and unyielding. She struggled, kicking and screaming, but it was no use. They were too strong. "Please," she begged, turning to her parents, "please don't do this." But they said nothing. Her mother turned her face away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, while her father stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. The betrayal was complete. Lyra's heart shattered as the slavers dragged her from the house. The village was quiet, the stars above indifferent to her suffering. No one came to help. No one even looked her way. She was taken aboard a sleek, black ship docked just outside the village, a slave ship known as the Harrower. The ship was vast, its interior cold and metallic, filled with cages and cells, each one holding captives from countless worlds. The air was thick with despair, the weight of hundreds of lives stolen and sold pressing down on Lyra like a suffocating fog. Thrown into a cramped cell, her wrists and ankles bound by heavy restraints, Lyra collapsed to the cold floor, her body shaking with sobs. The last image of her parents, broken, defeated, burned in her mind. The love she had once known felt like a lie, a cruel illusion shattered in an instant. She was alone now, betrayed, abandoned. But even in the depths of her despair, a small, flickering ember of defiance remained. She wouldn't give up. Not yet. Lyra would find a way out. And when she did, she would make sure the people who had done this to her would never forget the day they betrayed her. And she would never forget the price she paid for their mistakes. The cold, metallic hum of the Harrower reverberated through Lyra's bones as the ship sped through the void of space. The cargo hold where she was imprisoned was dimly lit, illuminated only by flickering blue lights that cast eerie shadows across the rows of cells. Inside each one, beings from all corners of the galaxy were huddled, defeated, and hopeless. Lyra had lost track of time. Days blended into one another, each one marked by hunger, exhaustion, and the suffocating weight of despair. The slavers provided minimal food, and the stale air inside her cell felt thick with sorrow and dread. The other captives, too broken by their circumstances, rarely spoke. When they did, it was only to share whispered stories of terrible fates awaiting those who were sold. Her wrists were bruised from the restraints, her once pristine silver skin dulled and dirtied from the ship's filthy environment. Yet despite everything, Lyra's spirit clung to life, even if only by a thread. Her mind returned to her family's betrayal, the way they had turned her into a commodity to settle their debts. The thought of it was like a thorn embedded in her heart, both a source of anger and pain that refused to go away. There was a part of her that wanted to give up, to let the darkness swallow her whole. But another part of her, the stronger part, refused. Lyra wasn't ready to die in some forgotten corner of the universe. She was more than just a victim. There had to be a way out. One day, after what felt like weeks of relentless travel, the ship jerked as it decelerated out of hyperspace, sending a wave of nauseating energy through the ship. The harsh voice of a slaver echoed through the ship's PA system, announcing their arrival at Echo Station, a notorious outpost near Terra Nova. Lyra had heard stories of Echo Station, a lawless, floating outpost in deep space, known for its underworld dealings, mercenaries, and black market trade. It was a place where everything had a price, and where the authorities turned a blind eye to the most vile transactions. The door to her cell creaked open, and two slavers, their eyes cold and emotionless behind their helmets, hauled her to her feet. She struggled weakly, but they were too strong. With a rough shove, they dragged her through the dim corridors of the ship and out into the bustling, chaotic interior of Echo Station. The air in the outpost was thick with the smell of fuel, metal, and unwashed bodies. Neon signs flickered in alien languages, and crowds of beings from hundreds of species bustled around her. Some wore armor, others robes, but nearly everyone seemed armed, and their expressions were hard, dangerous. Lyra felt utterly out of place, a lamb among wolves. She was pulled toward a dingy corner of the station where a slaver's auction was taking place. A handful of potential buyers, a mixture of aliens and humans, watched from the shadows. The slavers pushed her onto a raised platform, her wrists still bound, and the slaver leader began calling out her attributes. A rare Nixon, untouched, intelligent, and capable of unique abilities, the slaver droned, pointing to Lyra. Perfect for those with special needs or anyone seeking valuable, exotic property. The crowd murmured in interest, their eyes scanning her with cold calculation. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. Was this it? Was she about to be sold off like livestock to the highest bidder? Her eyes darted across the crowd, desperate for a way out, for anyone who might help. But no one met her gaze with anything resembling kindness or mercy. No one except a lone figure standing near the edge of the auction, half hidden in the shadows. He was human, tall, with scruffy brown hair and a rugged, weathered face. His dark jacket was scuffed, and a blaster hung casually at his side. He had an air of nonchalance, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, were locked on her with something different than the others. It wasn't greed or malice, it was curiosity, and perhaps even concern. As the bidding began, the tension in the air thickened. The slavers called out prices, and several buyers started raising their hands. Lyra's mind raced. Was this truly how it was going to end? Suddenly a voice rang out over the din. "Enough!" It was the human. His voice was steady but authoritative, cutting through the noise. He stepped forward, his hand resting on his blaster. And for the first time, Lyra saw the determination in his eyes. "I'll take her," he said, his gaze locked onto the slaver leader, "but not with money." The crowd fell silent, all eyes now on him. The slaver leader sneered, sizing him up. "And what exactly are you offering, human? This is a trade station, not a charity." "I'm offering that you leave with your lives," the human replied calmly, his voice dripping with confidence. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure none of you leave this station at all." Lyra's heart raced. What was this man doing? Was he really trying to save her, or was this some sort of trick? The slavers, clearly unimpressed, moved to grab their weapons, but the human was faster. In a blur of motion, he drew his blaster and fired. 3 precise shots echoed through the station, taking out the nearest slavers before they even had time to react. Chaos erupted as the remaining slavers scrambled to fight back, but the human was already in motion. He ducked behind a crate, firing off more shots with deadly accuracy while the crowd scattered in panic. Lyra, still bound, could only watch in awe as he took down one slaver after another, moving with the precision of someone who had seen his fair share of combat. Finally, the slaver leader, now the last one standing, raised his weapon, aiming it directly at the human. But before he could pull the trigger, the human launched himself forward, knocking the weapon from the slaver's hands and delivering a swift punch to his jaw. The slaver collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The battle was over as quickly as it had begun. The human holstered his blaster, breathing heavily, then turned to Lyra, his expression softening. "Come on," he said, kneeling to untie her restraints. "You're safe now." Lyra stared at him, wide-eyed and disoriented. Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man offered a faint smile. "Let's just say I don't like seeing people in chains. Name's Marcus Hale, by the way. And you are?" "Lyra," she managed, her voice trembling. "Well, Lyra," Marcus said as he helped her to her feet, "you're free now. I've got a ship nearby. If you want, you can come with me until you figure out what to do next." Lyra hesitated, still unsure if she could trust him. But after what she had just witnessed, and with nowhere else to go, she realized she didn't have much of a choice. This human had risked his life for her, and something in his eyes told her that maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. Nodding slowly, she followed Marcus through the chaos of the station. They moved quickly, avoiding the crowds until they reached the docking bay where his ship, the Seraphim, was waiting. The sleek, battle-worn vessel stood ready, its engines humming softly in the quiet of the bay. As Marcus led her aboard, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed forever. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time she felt something unfamiliar, hope. And for now, that was enough. The sleek, battle-worn ship, the Seraphim, hummed with life as it cut through the darkness of space. The stars stretched out in every direction, a vast, endless expanse that once represented freedom to Lyra, but now felt like a reminder of her isolation. Though she was no longer a prisoner aboard the Harrower, the chains of her past clung to her, weighing her down with the memories of betrayal and fear. Lyra sat in the corner of the common room, her knees drawn up to her chest, watching Marcus Hale as he piloted the ship through hyperspace. His posture was relaxed, but his movements were sharp, efficient, and focused. There was something about the way he handled the ship that reminded her of how he had fought the slavers back at Echo Station. Calm, calculated, and dangerous when needed. She had been aboard the Seraphim for 3 days now, but she still didn't quite know what to make of Marcus or his crew. The other 2 members of the small crew had been kind enough. Juno, the ship's mechanic, was a short, sharp-tongued woman with grease-streaked hair and a sarcastic wit that kept the tension light. She had taken to Lyra immediately, offering her spare clothes and a few offhand remarks that made Lyra smile despite herself. Then there was Rax, the quiet, towering navigator who barely spoke but seemed to understand the galaxy like it was a map etched into his mind. His dark, chitinous skin and imposing stature might have scared her at first, but Lyra quickly learned that his silence wasn't coldness, it was patience. He observed more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was usually something wise or calming, but it was Marcus who intrigued her the most. He had saved her without hesitation, risking his life for someone he didn't know. His quiet confidence and willingness to help had thrown her off balance. Lyra wasn't used to people acting out of pure kindness. Her family's betrayal had left her cynical, distrustful of others' intentions, and yet she found herself drawn to him. She couldn't deny the way her heart raced every time Marcus glanced her way, the way he spoke to her with such sincerity. There was no trace of pity in his words, just a calm, respectful acknowledgement of what she had been through. He never pried, never pushed her to talk about her past, but Lyra knew that he was giving her time to open up if she wanted to. It was strange, this unfamiliar kindness. It made her feel both vulnerable and safe at the same time. After hours of silent reflection, Marcus finally stood from the cockpit and made his way toward her, carrying 2 cups of something steaming and fragrant. "Thought you might want something to eat," he said, handing her one of the cups. "It's not much, but it's warm." Lyra took the cup, her fingers brushing his as she did. The simple contact sent a jolt of warmth through her, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed by the sudden flush in her cheeks. "Thanks," she muttered, taking a sip. The liquid inside was strong and slightly bitter, but it eased the tightness in her chest. Marcus sat down across from her, leaning back in his chair, watching her with that same easy smile. "How are you holding up?" Lyra hesitated, unsure how to answer. She had spent the last few days keeping to herself, lost in her thoughts and memories, but she knew that, eventually, she would have to face the reality of her situation. "I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice quiet. "Everything happened so fast. I'm grateful that you saved me, but I don't know what to do now." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You don't have to figure it all out right away. You've been through a lot. No one expects you to have all the answers right now." Lyra looked down into her cup, feeling the weight of his words. He was right, of course, but that didn't make it any easier. Her whole life had been turned upside down. The family she had trusted had sold her into slavery, and the future she had once dreamed of was now a tangled mess of fear and uncertainty. "What were they like?" Marcus asked softly, his voice careful, as if he didn't want to push her too hard. "Your family, I mean." Lyra's heart clenched at the mention of her family, the wound still fresh and raw. She thought of her father's downcast eyes, her mother's trembling hands, and the way they had let her be taken without a word of protest. "They were good people once," she said after a long pause, her voice barely above a whisper. "But things changed. My family fell into debt, and I guess they saw me as their only way out." Marcus didn't say anything, but she could feel the empathy radiating from him. He didn't need to speak. His silence was enough to let her know that he understood, that he wasn't judging her or her family. He was just there, offering his quiet support. "I don't know how to feel," Lyra continued, her voice breaking slightly. "Part of me hates them for what they did, for betraying me. But another part of me wonders if they really had a choice. Maybe they were desperate." Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Desperation can make people do terrible things," he said softly. "But that doesn't mean what they did was right. You have every right to feel hurt, Lyra." She blinked, surprised by his words. It was as if he had given her permission to feel the anger, the sorrow that had been bubbling beneath the surface ever since her capture. It felt strange to hear someone acknowledge her pain without trying to justify or dismiss it. For the first time, Lyra felt like she could breathe. "Thanks," she said quietly, glancing up at him. "I needed to hear that." Marcus offered her a small, understanding smile, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while, the hum of the ship the only sound between them. After a few moments, Juno strolled into the common room, wiping her hands on a rag. "Engines are purring like a kitten," she said with a grin. "We'll reach the edge of the Terra Nova system in a few hours." Marcus nodded, then turned back to Lyra. "We're heading to Terra Nova. It's a human colony, pretty safe, all things considered. You're welcome to stay with us as long as you need to, but if you want to start over somewhere else, I can help you get there." The offer took Lyra by surprise. She hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't dared to. Her entire life up until now had been dictated by her family's decisions, and now, for the first time, she had the freedom to choose her own path. "I don't know what I want yet," she admitted, her voice hesitant. "But thank you, Marcus, for everything." He gave her a nod, his gaze warm and steady. "No need to thank me. We've all had our share of bad turns in life. We help each other out when we can." Lyra felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. There was something about the way Marcus spoke, the way he looked at her, that made her feel seen, understood. She had been so lost, so broken, but here, on this ship with these people, she felt a glimmer of hope. Juno flopped down on the couch beside them, stretching her arms out. "Well, if you're sticking around, I hope you're good with tech. I could use some help in the engine room," she said with a wink. Lyra let out a small laugh, the sound foreign and unfamiliar after so much sorrow. "I'll do my best." As they shared a quiet moment of camaraderie, Rax's voice came through the comms, breaking the peace. "Captain, we've got something on the scanners. Looks like a ship following us." Marcus frowned, standing up. "I'll be right there." Lyra's stomach twisted. A ship following them? Her mind raced, and the faint flicker of hope she had been feeling suddenly dimmed. Was it the slavers? Had they come to take her back? Marcus met her gaze, his eyes serious but reassuring. "Don't worry, we'll handle this." But as Marcus headed toward the cockpit, Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She had just started to believe in a future beyond her past, and now the shadows of that past were closing in again. And this time, she wasn't sure if she could outrun them. The sharp whine of the ship's proximity alarm filled the Seraphim, breaking the quiet calm that had settled over the crew. Lyra's heart leapt into her throat as Marcus rushed toward the cockpit, followed closely by Juno and Rax. She remained rooted to her seat for a moment, fear coursing through her veins. Her mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Had the slavers tracked her down? Were they coming to reclaim what they believed belonged to them? She couldn't go back. She wouldn't go back. Summoning her courage, Lyra followed Marcus and the others into the cockpit, where the holographic display showed the unmistakable shape of a ship trailing them. It was smaller than the Seraphim, but fast, cutting through space with predatory intent. Her breath hitched as she recognized the distinctive markings on the hull. The Harrower, the slaver's ship. They had found her. Marcus stood at the controls, his expression hard and focused, a stark contrast to the calm demeanor he had shown before. Juno was already at her station, hands flying over the control panels as she ran a diagnostic of the ship's systems. Rax, silent as ever, took his place at the navigation console, his dark eyes scanning the display for any potential escape routes. "They're gaining on us, Marcus," Juno said, her voice tense. "We can try to outrun them, but the Harrower is faster than she looks." Marcus clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the controls. "We're not going to outrun them. They're here for Lyra." At the sound of her name, Lyra's stomach dropped. She felt a wave of nausea, the weight of the slavers' pursuit pressing down on her like a physical force. She had known that they wouldn't stop looking for her. She had known, deep down, that this day would come. But now that it was here, the reality was overwhelming. Lyra stepped forward, her voice trembling as she spoke. "You should leave me behind," she said, her eyes locking with Marcus's. "If you don't, they'll kill you all. I can't let you die for me." Marcus turned to her, his eyes intense but unwavering. "That's not happening, Lyra. I didn't rescue you just to give you back to them. We're going to fight." Juno shot a glance at Marcus, raising an eyebrow. "Fight? Marcus, they've got more firepower than we do. This isn't a fair fight." "Doesn't need to be fair," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We just need to be smarter." Lyra felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, fear, and something deeper, something she hadn't fully recognized until now. Marcus wasn't just fighting for her because it was the right thing to do. He was fighting for her because he cared. She had seen the way he looked at her, the way he had been gentle with her pain, never pushing, never demanding. It had been easy to ignore it at first, to chalk it up to kindness. But now, standing in the face of danger, she realized that her feelings for Marcus went beyond gratitude. She felt something for him, something powerful and terrifying. She couldn't let him die for her. "No," she said firmly, stepping closer to Marcus. "I won't let you risk your life for me. There has to be another way." Marcus looked at her, his expression softening slightly, but there was still a steel resolve in his eyes. "There's no other way, Lyra. We fight or they take you, and I'm not letting that happen." Before Lyra could argue further, Rax spoke up from his station, his deep voice calm but urgent. "They're hailing us." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Put it through." The holographic display flickered for a moment before the grim face of Vexar, the slaver leader, appeared on the screen. His cold, reptilian features were twisted into a sneer, his glowing yellow eyes locking onto Lyra with an unsettling intensity. "Marcus Hale," Vexar hissed, his voice a rasping growl. "You have something that belongs to me." Marcus crossed his arms, his voice steady and unyielding. "Lyra doesn't belong to anyone." Vexar's eyes flicked to Lyra, a cruel smile curling his lips. "Ah, the Nixon. She was a valuable asset, and you stole her from me. I've come to collect—" Lyra's blood ran cold at the sound of his voice, her body tensing with fear. She could still remember the cold grip of the slaver's hands, the chains that had bound her, and the darkness of the harrower. But Marcus stood between her and that life now, and she couldn't let Vexar take her back. She wouldn't. "You won't get her," Marcus said firmly, his hand hovering over the control panel, ready to make a move at the slightest provocation. Vexar chuckled, his voice dripping with malice. "You're a fool, Hale. You're outgunned and outnumbered. Surrender the girl and I'll let you live. Resist, and I'll tear your ship apart." For a moment, the cockpit was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she watched Marcus, waiting for his response. She knew what Vexar was capable of, and she knew how outmatched they were. But she also knew that Marcus wouldn't back down. "I think you're forgetting something, Vexar," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. "I've never been one to take orders from scum like you." With that, Marcus cut the transmission, and the cockpit erupted into action. The slaver's ship began closing in, its weapon systems powering up. "Shields up," Marcus barked as he took the controls, spinning the Seraphim into an evasive maneuver. "Rax, plot us a course through that asteroid field. Juno, get the weapons ready." Lyra's heart raced as the ship jolted, narrowly avoiding the first barrage of fire from the harrower. The cockpit lights flickered as the ship's systems strained under the pressure. "Shields are holding, but not for long," Juno called out as she fired back at the slavers, the ship's laser cannons lighting up the void of space. As the battle raged, Lyra stood frozen, her mind racing. She couldn't just sit there while they fought for her. She had to do something. Her people, the Nixons, were known for their connection to technology, their ability to interface with machines in ways that others couldn't. She hadn't used her abilities much before. There had never been a need. But now everything was on the line. Taking a deep breath, Lyra closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, feeling the hum of the ship's systems, the thrum of its power beneath her fingertips. The connection was faint at first, like trying to grasp smoke, but as she focused, it became stronger. She could feel the ship, the way it moved, the energy that flowed through its circuits. "I can help," she said, her voice steady. Marcus glanced at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I can interface with the ship's systems," Lyra explained quickly. "I can boost the shields, make us faster. Just give me a moment." Marcus hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Do it." Lyra moved to the control console, placing her hands on the panel. She closed her eyes again, focusing on the ship's core systems, letting her consciousness merge with the machinery. It was like slipping into a different state of being, where the boundaries between her mind and the ship's circuits blurred. She felt the shields weaken as another blast rocked the ship, but she willed them to hold, feeding them more power, tightening the energy field around them. The ship responded, its systems humming in sync with her thoughts. The engines roared to life, pushing them faster, more agile, as they dodged the incoming fire from the harrower. "We're getting through the asteroid field," Rax called out, his voice calm as ever. The slaver's ship struggled to keep up, its bulkier design not as nimble as the Seraphim. Lyra could feel the shift in the battle, the tide turning in their favor. But Vexar wasn't finished yet. A sudden, powerful blast hit the Seraphim, sending a shudder through the ship. The lights flickered, and Lyra felt the shields falter. "We can't take another hit like that," Juno shouted. Lyra's mind raced. They were so close. She couldn't let it end like this. With a surge of determination, she pushed her connection with the ship to its limit, funneling every ounce of power into the shields and engines. Her breath came in short gasps as the strain took its toll, but she refused to let go. "Hang on!" Marcus yelled as he veered the ship into a sharp dive, dodging an asteroid at the last second. The harrower, unable to match the maneuver, clipped the edge of the asteroid, its hull tearing open in a violent explosion. Fire and debris filled the screen as the slaver's ship spun out of control, its weapons silenced. For a moment there was only silence in the cockpit. Then, slowly, Marcus turned to Lyra, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and relief. "You did it," he said, his voice soft with disbelief. Lyra collapsed into the chair, her body trembling with exhaustion. She had done it. They had won. She looked up at Marcus, and for the first time since her capture she felt truly free. Marcus knelt beside her, his expression gentle. "You saved us." "No," Lyra whispered, her heart swelling with emotion. "We saved each other." Their eyes met, and in that moment something shifted between them, something deeper than words could express. The connection they had built over the past few days, the trust, the care, it all came crashing to the surface. Without hesitation, Marcus reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Lyra. You're free now, for real." Lyra's heart swelled with gratitude and something more, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel until now. In the midst of the chaos and danger, she had found something she never thought she would: love. And it was with the human who had saved her. With Marcus by her side, she knew she could face whatever the galaxy threw at them next. And for the first time in a long time, Lyra felt like she truly belonged.